Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for the Kabbalah Café today, the Erev Shabbat of Tazria-Metzora. And thank you for Mordechai and Raya for hosting this event. A special thank you to Gershom and Rachel Dandy for sponsoring this special edition of Kabbalah Café in honor of the Refuah Shalema of Michal ben Avraham. I think it's Michal Yaakov ben Avraham. So we talk a lot about Lashon Harah, not to talk Lashon Harah. In certain circles, there's even a greater emphasis on this. The Chafetz Chaim, the great tzaddik that lived around 90, 100 years ago, he wrote a special sefer called Shmirat HaLashon on the prohibition of not talking Lashon Harah. So in this week's Parsha, we talk about the majority of the double Parshas this week talks about a person that has an affliction of the skin, and he has to be, if he's impure, then he has to go outside in quarantine outside of the camps of Israel and to wait there until he becomes pure again. So what is the main reason why one would receive the affliction of the skin? The reason is because they may have spoken Lashon Harah. They may have said something bad about someone else to a third individual. There's an interesting story about, I'm using this story sort of as a gateway into the subject I want to speak about. The Chafetz Chaim was very friendly with the Rebbe Rashab, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber of Chabad. And they used to meet at different conferences of Rabbanim and great Torah leaders. So one time, the Chafetz Chaim asked the Rebbe Rashab, why is it that in Chabad, they're not so careful, or not so careful. Not speaking Lashon Harah is not such a major campaign. It's not such a major issue, as opposed to in the amongst the Lithuanian groups of Yiddishkeit, they're more careful. And so the Rebbe Rashab answered him, there's a difference between, for Chassidim of course, a difference between not talking Lashon Harah and perhaps shaving one's beard, which one may be able to find some leniencies, but according to Chabad, and others, it's a biblical mitzvah to grow one's beard. And so he said, the difference between not speaking Lashon Harah and shaving is that when someone shaves, you have all these preparations before one does that. And so that basically, not speaking Lashon Harah is something, obviously we're not allowed to speak Lashon Harah, and there are 18 prohibitions in the Torah, according to the Chafetz Chaim, but it's something which a person did, which if he did it, it's not good. But it's almost like it came out, or it didn't make all these preparations. But making a preparation for something that could be even more of an emboldened subject. So that brings me to the point, is that what really is the problem with speaking Lashon Harah? A person can speak, God forbid, bad about someone else, something which is true, something which really happened, but nevertheless, if we understand what's really the problem with speaking Lashon Harah, it may help us understand the real issue and hopefully be able to refrain from speaking Lashon Harah. So the first point is obviously that it's a violation of Ahavat Yisrael. If you saw someone do something bad and you go to tell a third person about it, one is doing the opposite of Ahavat Yisrael. Unfortunately, spreading bad things about someone else. That's not a good thing. That's on a very elementary level. But let's go a little deeper into the subject of Lashon Harah. The Talmud tells us in Baba Batra that someone who speaks Lashon Harah, that Lashon Harah can kill, that's a literal translation, but it basically means to hurt 3 individuals. The one who spoke Lashon Harah, and the one who was said to, and the one who heard it. So, the one who said Lashon Harah, it's quite clear that the person that says Lashon Harah, he's doing the opposite of Ahavat Yisrael. So that's clear to us why that person can, God forbid, be hurt. Then you want to say the person that it was about. We'll talk about that soon, but we could sort of understand that the person that it was about, there was bad energy, bad information spoken about that person. So you can understand why that person could be hurt. But why would the person that heard it, why would that person be judged just because Mr. A said Lashon Harah to him? In other words, it could be you're sitting in a restaurant and you overhear someone saying to someone else, and so just because you heard Lashon Harah, why does that make the person be destined to receive a punishment? And so the Rebbe says something very interesting. If you look closely into the text of the Gemara doesn't say the word the one that hears it. The Gemara says the word someone who is mekabel. Mekabel in Hebrew and Lashon HaKodesh means to receive, to accept. In other words, there can be 2 individuals listening to the gossiper. There could be one person who is listening and he says, wow, that's a great piece of Lashon Harah. One person can be listening to someone else speaking and say, and as some people might call it, a juicy piece of Lashon Harah. Wow, listen, this guy did A, B, and C. Oh, that's terrible. Wow, and then he goes and tells someone else, and that guy tells someone else, and it goes on and on. But that's someone who accepts it. Then there could be a person sitting next to the first guy, also hears Lashon Harah. Or as we said earlier, maybe sitting in the restaurant and overhears a conversation, people speaking out loud. And you hear Mr. A talking to Mr. B about Mr. C. And you are Mr. 4, and you are listening to the conversation. And he says, you know what Mr. C did? Wow, that's unbelievable. The guy that's listening says, no. He says to himself, it's impossible. I can't believe that Mr. C really, really did that. I refuse to accept it. So either because you know that Mr. C was not even in that place, or because you just know that because he has a neshama, there's a very high chance that he didn't do what Mr. A said about him. That's called the hamekablo, the person that accepts it. So if a person refuses to accept the Lashon Harah, then that person is not included in the quote-unquote punishment which comes to the clan who is within the issue of the Lashon Harah. So if someone comes and says to you something, so you have the full right to tell the person, I'm sorry, but I refuse to accept this piece of information. It can't be true. So that's one beautiful interpretation into the concept of Lashon Harah. Now let's go a little deeper into the subject about the person who the Lashon Harah was said about. Theoretically speaking, you can have a person over here in Yerushalayim saying Lashon Harah about a person in South Africa. One second, in Yerushalayim, I can't imagine anybody saying Lashon Harah. But wherever it is, two people in two totally different places in the world. And one person says Lashon Harah about another person. I would like to even expand this concept to WhatsApps, social media, emails. People's fingers are very free on the send button. If someone writes some information about someone else, all of a sudden it becomes a fact. It becomes black on white. It's a pity that one person can ruin someone else's life so easily by just writing a message, sending a message on a group, embarrassing someone. We need to be so sensitive. Just yesterday, I saw in a WhatsApp group someone answering someone in a very belittling way. He could have said it differently. So I just sent him a private message. I said, I think it would be a good idea in the future just to send the person a private message. You didn't say anything bad, but it would have been accepted easier. It would not have embarrassed the person in public. So he sent me back a message. We're allowed to say there's an open conversation policy. So I responded to him, you're right. Everyone can say whatever they want. But I think we need to be super sensitive. Don't just think about yourself. I have a response, and I have a right to respond whatever I want. So as long as I'm not saying anything bad, I'm allowed to say it. And my argument is, true, you didn't say anything bad per se, but I think with a little extra sensitivity, I think you could have brought the message much clearer and in more of an acceptable way. So I think it's important in this parsha to talk about the idea of Lashon Harah and to try to bring ourselves to the situation of understanding and being super, super sensitive. Yes, it's okay to be super sensitive more than the norm because we're dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with people's feelings. And you never know how a person can accept it. So let's say you have one person in New York and one person in Europe, and the person in New York talks about the person at the other end of the world. You know what? The person in Europe may not even know that the Lashon Harah is being talked about him or message. And he may never know. He may never find out. So why should that person be included in this trio that we talked about earlier in the Talmud? 3 individuals that can become hurt, God forbid. The one who says Lashon Harah, the one who it's about, and the one who accepts it. Why should the person that it was about, he might even not know that it's happened. So why should that person also receive a punishment, God forbid? After all, Mr. A, Ruvain, he just said something. He could say, I just spoke. I saw that person going into a certain restaurant. So big deal. So he said it. What's talking anyways? It's a bunch of hot air. So why should it really affect, God forbid, the individual who was said about? And the answer is as follows. we should never underestimate speech. If anybody here thinks that speech is only speech, it's just a bunch of hot air. I didn't do anything. I didn't hit the person. I didn't hurt the person physically. It's just, the person could say, I just said Lashon Harah. I just hot air. Big deal. So my mouth moved a little bit. No. The power of speech is very powerful. You know, when Hashem created the world with the 10 utterances, as we're going to learn in a few weeks in the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, on Shabbos afternoon. And Hashem doesn't have hands, chas v'shalom. Hashem doesn't have physical features. Hashem is way beyond anything that we can imagine. So Hashem didn't have to create the world with his hands, so to speak. Hashem just said, there shall be heavens, boom, there was a heaven. There shall be trees, grass, boom. In a split moment, it already happened. Just from the Asara Ma'amarot, the 10 utterances, that was enough for Hashem to create the world. True, we are human beings. And in order for us to create something, in order for us to accomplish something, we need to actually do it. Go ahead and our hands, we have to get into it. But nevertheless, because we are connected to Hashem, on some level, we also have this concept of the utterances. When you are connected to someone, then it rubs off. Even from on a most minimal level, the characteristics of the person rubs off. So infinitely more when it comes to Hashem, that we, Am Yisrael, the chosen nation, we are connected to Hashem so strongly, that if Hashem creates the world with 10 utterances, and continues to create the world till this moment, every single nanosecond, Hashem continues to create the world with his speech. We also can create with our speech. Speech is very powerful. It's not just a bunch of hot air. Speech is something which can go very, very deep and can really impact someone or something. So we don't necessarily see how it's impacting. But if you ask the scientists, they'll explain to you how if someone stands in Japan and blows, just gives a blow, it can create a hurricane and a huge storm somewhere hundreds and perhaps thousands of miles away. It just started from a blow. But it developed into a storm later on. And that's just from a blow. How much more so when it comes to actually saying something that can really have a big effect. So let's talk about Lashon Harah. You know what? I like talking about the positive. Let's talk about the positive. If you say to your friend, wow, did you hear what Mr. C did? Did you know that he just finished a tractate of Talmud? Did you know that I just saw a little girl giving a drink, a bottle of water to an old person, or helping them cross the street? When you say something like that, you are creating positive energy. It's not just that you said something. You're creating zichuyot, merits, for this little girl that helped the old lady cross the street. For the little girl and for the elderly woman. Sometimes, someone does something small, and maybe it's unrecognized, maybe it can be overlooked. But when you say it, when the power of speech is so great, the power of speech is so powerful that when you say something positive about someone else, you can bring them bracha, also for yourself, the person who was said about, and the person who did the good act with a third or fourth individual. So think about how much positive energy we can bring to the world. So when it comes to Lashon Harah, let's just explain the bottom line. When it comes to Lashon Harah, not saying something negative about a third party, we can understand it much deeper now. What's happening now? What's happening is that when a person says Lashon Harah about someone else, they are creating greater bad energy, primarily about the person who did the bad act. So it doesn't make a difference where in the world the person is. The person can be in Europe. But the fact itself that one said something negative about about their friend, that itself can chas v'shalom bring something negative for that person, even if they'll never even know that anything was said bad about. So our speech is very powerful. It can really have a great impact on not only on the person we're talking about, but on the whole atmosphere around us. And therefore, it's better to put a focus not on the negative of not speaking Lashon Harah, not on the 18 prohibitions, but on the positive. Because when we talk about the positive, what are we basically saying? We're saying that let's talk only good things. Let's bring good energy. When you see your neighbor in the morning, tell them good morning. Tell them thank you if they did something good. They might not be such a great neighbor. But the fact itself that you say good things, that itself can bring them bracha. You know, it's possible that a person did something nice. You say, you know what? I said something to my friend. And it could be, said something good, a compliment. And it could be that the person may not receive any specific reward, sachar per se. Because, you know, it wasn't such a great thing. But the fact itself that you pointed this out to someone else, you said, wow, this person's a real tzaddik. You gave tzedakah. You put on tefillin. You came to a minyan. You made the effort. Just by complimenting the person. I'm not even talking about one person to a third party. You meet someone on the street, there's no one else there. And you say, wow, you're such a big tzaddik. You're wearing your tzitzis today. I saw what mitzvah you did yesterday. The fact itself that you compliment the person, what are you doing? You're bringing good energy and bracha for that person. Even if it may have been a very, very small, minor issue. The fact itself that you pointed it out, that brings bracha for the person and for you yourself. I think this message is very important, not only because of the parsha this week, that no one should receive an affliction of the skin as a result of speaking Lashon Harah, but also from the time which we're in Sfirat HaOmer. In Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, it's not only the actual counting the numbers, it's not only building up towards Shavuot, and it's not only the spiritual Sfirot of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet. Now we're middle of the week Tiferet, almost at the end. But it's moreover, it's correcting the problem of the students of Rabbi Akiva. The students of Rabbi Akiva were great tzaddikim, but somehow they missed the boat by not being extra careful more than the norm. I don't think the students of Rabbi Akiva had the problem of shouting at each other. I don't think they had the issue of God forbid, raising a hand or even hatred in their heart. They were missing lo na'agu kavod ze bezeh. They didn't have the ultimate, honor and respect for one another. It could have been better. It could have been much better. And this connects to what we said earlier about being careful, being super careful with our fingers on the buttons or on the iPad, especially the send button. But to be really, really careful. It could be that you didn't do something that bad. Obviously, if it's with social media, you're not picking up a stick, God forbid, and hitting the person. But sometimes what we write and what we say can be more damaging even than hurting a person with a stick. So the message of this double parsha and Sfirat Omer, which we're in, is how much we have to be careful in Lashon Harah, not just technically not saying those words, but to really understand in our hearts what is the problem with Lashon Harah. And we realize that we have to add in Ahavat Yisrael and being careful, realizing what the problem could be with speaking Lashon Harah. Hopefully that will help us be extra careful in refraining from speaking evil about someone else, and most importantly, to focus on the positive as much as we can, to be able to speak good things about another person, to speak good things to another person, to compliment our friends, to compliment our spouses, to compliment our children and parents, and to say only good things wherever we go, because saying things is very powerful. Speech can make a very, very strong impact. Thank you so much for joining us for this special Kabbalah Café. I look forward to Bezrat Hashem to seeing you tonight, tomorrow, and next week for all of our classes. Shalom, shalom. All the best. Shabbat shalom.